You have survived everything you have faced. The exile, the forest, the return. You have made decisions that cost people things, and you have lived with the cost. You are good at what you do. You know this. The tribe is alive because of what you know and what you are willing to do. But there is a child in your tribe who is getting sicker, and the person who could help her is gone, and you are the chief, and you do not know what to do. This is the part they do not prepare you for. Before we begin, this is the 7th story. It comes after the murder. The murder is not something you have spoken about to anyone. It lives inside you in the category of things that are known and not examined, the way certain injuries live in the body, present and real but manageable, as long as you do not press on them directly. You have been pressing on other things instead. The winter preparation, the hunt, the daily decisions of a tribe that depends on you. This has worked, more or less. The days have continued, the tribe has continued, the weight in your chest has continued alongside everything else, carried because it had to be carried, because a chief did not have the option of setting things down. And then the child got sick. Her name, in the sounds of your language, means something close to Ember. She is 6 years old. She has been part of this tribe since before you led it. Since before the exile, since the time when you were simply a member, rather than the person responsible for the members. You have known her whole life. She has known none of yours that matters. In this story, you are the chief, and the child is sick, and the shaman is gone, and you are going to find out exactly what you do not know. It started with a cough. You heard it in the night, a small sound, unremarkable. Children coughed. The old ones coughed. The cold air of autumn found its way into lungs and announced itself, and mostly it meant nothing. You noted it the way you noted everything, filed it without weight, continued sleeping. In the morning the child was quieter than usual. This too was not alarming in itself. Children had quiet mornings sometimes, of the particular subdued quality of a body that was slightly below its ordinary level of energy. You looked at her across the fire, and she looked back at you with the eyes that were normally very bright, and this morning was slightly less so, and you noted this too. You thought about the shaman. This happened often now. The involuntary reaching for something that was no longer there. A small illness would have been nothing to her. She would have looked at the child for a moment with those extraordinary dark eyes and known what she was looking at, and gone to her bag of preparations with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times. You did not have that calm efficiency. You had a general knowledge of plants. The way all members of the tribe had a general knowledge of plants. What was edible and what was not, and what caused fever and what reduced it. The broad outlines of the knowledge that she had carried in its full depth and specificity. The broad outlines were not the same as the depth. You watched the child through the morning. She ate a little. She coughed several more times. By midday the cough had a different quality, lower, more settled, the kind that suggested something establishing itself, rather than something passing through. You went to the place where the shaman had kept her things. She had left almost nothing behind. This made sense. She had come to you out of the forest with a bag, and she had left, in whatever way she had left, with the same bag. What remained were a few things she had gathered since her arrival, small bundles of dried plants hanging from the shelter's frame, a clay vessel with something dark and dry inside it. You looked at these things and understood that you were looking at fragments of a language you did not speak. On the second day you tried what you knew. You went to the forest in the early morning, before the tribe was fully awake, and you gathered what you recognized. The plants whose names you knew, whose properties you understood at the level of broad use. The root that reduced fever, the bark that eased the throat, the leaf that opened the chest when breathing was difficult. You prepared them the way you had watched her prepare things, though the watching had been from a distance, and the precision of her work had looked easy in the way that all mastery looked easy until you attempted it yourself. You gave the preparation to the child. She took it without complaint. She was a cooperative child, had always been. The kind of child who did what adults asked her to do without needing to understand why. This quality, which had always seemed simple and agreeable, now seemed like a form of trust that you were not entirely certain you deserved. The cough continued through the day. By evening it was no better. Not worse, you told yourself. Not better, the child's body told you back. The fever had arrived properly now, a heat in her skin when you put your hand to her forehead that was more than the warmth of the fire. Her mother sat beside her through the night. You sat near the fire and watched, and thought about what else you knew, and arrived at the limits of it, faster than you had expected. The gap between knowing something exists and knowing how to do it is a gap that only becomes visible when you need to cross it. You had known the shaman's work was skilled. You had known that what she did was not simple. But knowing this abstractly and standing in front of a feverish child with a collection of plants you did not fully understand how to use were different kinds of knowing entirely. On the third day you tried to remember everything you had watched. You sat in the early morning before the tribe woke, and you went through it carefully. The way you went through hunting plans. The way you assessed terrain before a difficult route. You had watched her work many times. You had been present at the old man's treatment, at the child's wound. You had been present at smaller things. The daily maintenance of the tribe's health that had happened so quietly, you had barely registered it as work. You tried to reconstruct what you had seen. Her hands, the specific movements of them, the way they assessed before they acted, the pressure of her fingers that seemed to be asking a question of the body rather than simply working on it. The sounds she made sometimes, low and continuous, that you had understood as something being communicated to the sick person at a level below words. The way she arranged the preparations, the order of things, the timing. You had watched all of this. You had not been watching in the way she did things, with the full attention of someone learning. You had been watching in the way a chief watched, with the peripheral attention of someone who was always attending to many things simultaneously, and trusting that the specialist was handling the specialty. You had trusted her, you had not learned from her. There was a difference, and you were feeling it now in full. Once in the forest, she had taken your hand and placed it on the bark of the old oak. She had said something about the life moving through it, the connection between things that shared the same ground. You had felt something under your palm, or believed you had, the quality of her attention making the ordinary extraordinary for a moment. You thought about that now, about what she had been trying to show you, not just about trees, about the way of looking at the world that allowed her to see what others could not see, the language the body spoke that she could read. You did not have that language, but you remembered her hands. You went back to the child, and you tried. Memory is an imperfect teacher. It records the surfaces of things, the visible gestures and the sounds, without always capturing the understanding underneath them. You were working from memory now, doing your best approximation of what you had watched, and your best approximation was honest work and genuinely offered, and not enough. You knew it was not enough. You did it anyway because it was what you had. On the fourth night you could not sleep. The child was still feverish. Not worse, you kept telling yourself. Not better, the night kept telling you back. You sat at the fire and the tribe slept around you, and the weight that had been living in your chest since the eastern forest sat heavier than usual. You thought about him, not for the first time, not for the 100th time. The face that would not leave, the question that had no answer and would never have one. You had acted on a pattern of observations that had seemed, when you assembled them, like the outline of something real. The look at the water, the proximity, the accumulation of small things. He had been innocent. You did not know this with certainty. This was the honest thing to say. You did not know it with certainty. But the child lying sick in the shelter and the empty space where the shaman had kept her things, and the knowledge of what the shaman could have done for this child, the knowledge of what was lost when she was lost, all of it was pressing on the other thing, the thing you did not examine directly, and the pressing was making it harder to maintain the not examining. He had been good. This you knew with certainty. He had been patient and generous and skilled, and the tribe had been better for his presence, and you had ended his presence, and the ending of it had been done in the name of protecting what you had built. You looked at the sick child. You had built the tribe. You were the chief. The tribe existed because of the decisions you had made, including the hard ones, including the ones that cost things. This was what leadership was.
You had always known this. But the child's fever was real, and the shaman's absence was real, and the face in the eastern forest was real, and all of it was real at the same time, and the weight in your chest was the weight of all of it together. Guilt is not the same as wrongness. A decision can be wrong and carry no guilt if it was made honestly with the information available. A decision can be right and carry enormous guilt if the cost of it lands on someone who did not choose to pay it. What you are carrying is not the simple weight of having made a mistake. It is the more complicated weight of having acted from fear and of not knowing, and of the not knowing having consequences that extend beyond yourself into a child's fever and a tribe without its healer. On the 5th day, the quick-eyed woman came to you, and she had been watching you work on the child, the way she watched everything, with the open, unguarded attention that was her particular quality. She had said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and because she understood, as she understood most things, what the situation required. She sat beside you. She had her own knowledge of plants, less than the shaman's, and more than yours. The practical knowledge of a person who had gathered and prepared food for years and had accumulated understanding through the accumulation of doing. She showed you things, not instructing, exactly, simply doing alongside you, her hands demonstrating the difference between what you had been doing and the slightly different thing that might work better, the grinding of the root, the amount of water, and the temperature it needed to reach, and how you knew when it had reached it. Small things, adjustments that seemed minor and were not minor. You watched her hands the way you had watched the shaman's hands, but this time with the full attention of someone who needed to learn, rather than someone who was trusting the learning to someone else. You prepared the new mixture together. The child took it. You waited. Through the afternoon, the fever shifted, not breaking but moving, changing quality in a way that felt different from the previous days. The child slept more deeply than she had since the illness began. You sat and watched her sleep. The quick-eyed woman sat beside you and also watched. Neither of you spoke. There was a companionship in the watching that was its own kind of comfort, and the specific comfort of not being alone inside a difficult thing. What the shaman had was irreplaceable, but what the tribe had collectively was not nothing. The quick-eyed woman's partial knowledge, and your partial knowledge, and the child's body doing what bodies did when given the right conditions, were all working in the same direction. This was not shamanic skill. It was something simpler, and in its simplicity perhaps more resilient. People doing what they could with what they had together for someone who needed them. On the 6th day, the child's fever broke. You were asleep when it happened, finally sleeping after 5 nights of shallow wakefulness. And the quick-eyed woman woke you with a touch on your arm and a look on her face that you understood before she spoke. You went to the child. She was damp with the sweat of a fever that had broken, and her color was different, and when you put your hand to her forehead, the terrible heat was gone. She looked up at you with eyes that were clearer than they had been in 6 days. She said your name, not the chief's name, the title, the word that meant the person responsible. Your actual name, the sound you had been called since childhood, that you heard less and less as the role accumulated around you.
She said it in the simple way that children said names, without weight or ceremony. Neb, because she knew you, and you were there, and she was glad you were there. You sat beside her for a long time. The tribe moved around you, the morning beginning its ordinary business. The sounds of people doing what they did. The old man's cough, lighter today. The children playing in the space near the eastern shelter. The smell of the fire and the cold air and the forest. The child fell back into a real sleep, the deep, untroubled sleep of a body that had fought something and won. You stayed beside her and let the morning do what it did. Relief is its own kind of weight. The lifting of a particular fear does not empty the chest, but changes what is in it, and the change is not always simple. You had been afraid for 6 days with the specific fear of someone who understood that they were insufficient for what was required. And the child was better now. You had helped make her better. You and the quick-eyed woman and the child's own body. And underneath the relief, unchanged the other thing. Still there, still the face, still the question without an answer. The child sleeping. Both of these things at once. In the days that followed the child's recovery, you thought about what you had learned, not only about the plants, about the gap, the specific shape of what the shaman's absence had made visible, the place in the tribe's capacity that her presence had filled so thoroughly that the filling had been invisible until it was gone. Every tribe needed this. You understood this now in a way that you had understood it before, only theoretically. The person who moved between the visible and invisible worlds, who spoke the body's language, who knew where the border was between what could be managed with ordinary means and what required something more. Every tribe needed this person. Some tribes had them, some did not. You had had one. You thought about her in the forest, the nights she had gone out alone, the ritual fires, the smoke, the trance that had looked from the outside like sleep and was something else entirely. You thought about the things she had said, the thread connecting all living things, the way the seen and unseen worlds were the same world from different angles. You had listened to these things and found them interesting and somewhat beyond your framework and had filed them alongside everything else. Now you took them out of the file and looked at them differently. She had been trying to show you something. Not for her benefit, for the tribe's. And she had understood that what she carried was not meant to be carried alone, that the knowledge needed somewhere to go after her. She had been, in her quiet way, trying to teach you, and you had been too busy being the chief to learn. You sat with this, the specific quality of a regret that could not be acted on because the opportunity was gone. She was gone. Whatever she had been trying to show you was gone with her. The door she had been trying to open was closed, unless it was not. The shaman had spoken of the threshold as a real place. She had spoken of the invisible world as a real world, connected to this one, accessible through the right kind of attention. She had gone somewhere. The body had been gone. And the emptiness of the sleeping place on the third morning was not the emptiness of a body removed, but the emptiness of a presence that had simply ceased to be in that location. Gone somewhere, not necessarily gone from everything. You did not let yourself follow this thought to its end. Not yet. You began to go to the forest edge at night. Not every night. Some nights, the nights when the weight was heaviest and sleep was furthest and the fire had burned to coals and the tribe was deep in its rest. You went to the edge where the camp became trees, and you stood there and you looked into the dark. You were not sure what you were doing. You did not have a name for it. The shaman would have had a name for it, probably. A word in the language of between worlds that described the act of standing at the threshold and making yourself available to whatever was on the other side. You did not have that word. You simply stood. The forest at night was what it had always been, dark. Alive with sounds that were the sounds of things that lived in the dark. The rustle of something small moving through the undergrowth. And a bird somewhere in the high branches. The wind in the upper canopy. a sound that was always moving. You stood and you thought about the shaman, and you thought about the child's recovery, and you thought about the old oak in the forest with its hand on the bark and the something you had felt under your palm that you had never fully decided was real. You thought about what she had said, the thread connecting everything alive, the same ground, the way a tree's life and a person's life were not as separate as they appeared. You put your hand on the bark of the tree nearest you. You stood there in the dark with your palm flat on the rough surface, and you did what she had done, or what you remembered of what she had done, which was simply to be still and to attend. The tree was cold, the bark was rough, but the forest continued around you doing what forests did. And then, very faintly, something, not a voice, not a vision, something more, like a change in temperature, a slight warmth where there had been cold, a sense of something that was not quite presence, but was not quite absence either, something at the edge of perception, precisely at the threshold between what you could explain and what you could not. You stood there for a long time. The shaman had said the door stayed open once you opened it. She had said this to you in the forest, her voice very quiet and very certain, the voice of someone describing something they had seen clearly. You had listened and found it interesting and filed it. Now you were standing at a tree in the dark with your hand on the bark, and something that was not quite nothing was present, and the file was open and the thing she had said was out of it, and you were, for the first time, not immediately certain she had been wrong. Winter came. The cold that had been sharpening itself since autumn arrived fully, settling over the forest with the patient permanence of a season that knew it had time. The tribe moved into its winter rhythms, the routines of a group that had survived cold before and understood what it required. The fire maintained, the shelter reinforced, the food stores managed carefully. You led through all of it. This was your function, and you performed it with the competence that the tribe needed and had come to expect. The decisions about the food allocation, the shelter repairs, and the management of the small frictions that long, cold nights in close quarters inevitably produced. You did all of it. The child recovered fully. This was the cleanest good thing of the season, the thing without complication. The small person running again through the camp with the particular energy of a body that had been sick and was now emphatically not sick. You watched her and felt something that was not complicated at all. The quick-eyed woman had become something different to you in the weeks since the illness. Not different in what she was. She had always been quick and perceptive and quietly reliable. Different in how you understood what she was. Had knowledge you had not valued at its full weight, because the shaman's deeper knowledge had been present, and had made the quick-eyed woman's knowledge seem like a smaller version of the same thing. It was not a smaller version of the same thing. It was a different thing, practical and grounded, and applicable in ways that the shaman's work had not always been. And you began to learn from her the way you should have begun earlier, with the full attention of someone who understood that this was important. The tribe continued. The wait continued. These two things traveled together through the winter, as they had since the eastern forest, as they would. You were beginning to understand, for as long as you carried both of them. A tribe is not a single thing. It is the accumulated product of everyone in it. Every skill and every absence of skill, every strength and every gap. You had thought of yourself as the thing that held it together, the center around which everything organized. You were beginning to understand that this was only approximately true. The tribe held itself together. You were one of the things it used to do that. The difference mattered. It happened in the deep cold of late winter, the month when the dark was longest and the food stores were at their most carefully managed, and the tribe was at its most inward, gathered around the fire against the world outside. You had gone to the forest edge again, one of the nights. The nights when the weight was heaviest and the cold was sharp, and the stars were very clear in the gaps between the branches. You stood at your tree. You put your hand on the bark. And this time the warmth came faster. Not dramatically, not in the way of stories where things announced themselves with thunder and light. Quietly, the way the shaman had said all the real things came, through the patient channel of a body that had learned to be still enough to receive them. The warmth under your palm, and with it, something else. A direction, not a voice, not a vision, not anything you could point to and describe to another person, but a direction, a sense of something that was located, that was somewhere specific, rather than nowhere in particular. East. The feeling was east, whatever it was that you were receiving, whatever signal the standing at the threshold was picking up, it was coming from the east. From the forest to the east, the old forest, the deep part, the part you had walked through with her once when she had taken your hand at the oak. You stood there for a long time with your hand on the bark and the warmth and the direction. Then you went back to the fire. You sat. The tribe slept around you. The coals gave their red light to the shelter walls. You thought about what you had felt. You thought about whether it was real, or whether it was the mind of a person who was carrying too much, reaching for something to hold on to, manufacturing meaning from the ordinary coldness of a winter tree. You thought about the shaman, about the things she had said, about the door that stayed open once it was opened. You thought, east. You did not know what was in the eastern forest. You did not know if anything was there at all. The feeling might have been nothing. The warmth might have been the body's own heat reflecting back from the bark. The direction might have been wishful thinking, shaped by a mind that wanted something to be true. You knew all of this. You held all of this. And underneath all of this, quiet and specific and not going away, the direction. East. Something east. Not yet, but there. The fire burned low. Outside, the winter continued. Inside you, something that had been only weight began, very slightly, to be something else. Not certainty. Something before certainty. A direction. A note on history. Illness was one of the primary causes of death in prehistoric human populations. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans dealt with a wide range of infections, parasites, and injuries, and that survival from serious illness was often uncertain without effective treatment. The role of the healer in prehistoric communities was therefore not incidental, but central. The loss of an experienced healer would have had immediate and measurable consequences for a group's survival, particularly in winter when immune systems were stressed and foraging for medicinal plants was limited. Evidence of medicinal plant use in prehistoric contexts is well established. Pollen analysis from Neanderthal burial sites has suggested that certain medicinal plants were deliberately placed with the dead, implying knowledge of their properties that predates modern Homo sapiens. The transmission of this knowledge, from healer to healer across generations, would have been one of the most critical forms of cultural inheritance in early human communities. The loss of that transmission, the death of a healer without having passed on their knowledge, would have been experienced by the community as a profound and practical loss, not merely a personal one. The child recovered. This time, the next illness would come, as illness always came. Whether the tribe would be better prepared for it depended on what happened next, and what happened next was not yet determined. Good night.